she has all excuse for not able to attend the seminar today. Hence, we have arranged the convener has arranged an alternate arrangement, and on behalf of the college and department, I welcome the chief guest of the morning and leave space for the convener to introduce the chief guest of the morning. Thank you.
Sir, unmute பண்ணீங்க சார்.
Good morning. It is my pleasure to introduce our research person, Mr.v.Balakumar, Assistant Professor of English, PKR College for Women, Gobi. Yesterday, we invited him as a chairperson for the afternoon session. While he was giving an intro of subaltern literature, I thought, given time, induce our thirsty of our knowledge. Fortunately, by God's grace or by the magic of time, today again we have him as our resource person. Thank you, Balana. Thank you, Bala sir. Nice to see you again in our seminar. Thank you. I leave the stage for Balana. Balakumar sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Subhaya brother. I think let me start very professionally. Respected Secretary of Ammal College, respected Principal, respected Head of the Department of English, Dr. Gurudev Rajan, respected Convener of this conference, Dr. Subhaya Senthilkumar, respected Co-Convener, Dr. Hannah Evangeline, and respected PKR Arts, Organizing Secretary of this conference. I think I've been given a very short notice by my dear brother and friend, Mr. Subhaya. He rang up this morning and asked me to have a kind of presentation on subaltern writing or subaltern literature, whatever be the topic that we have. So I have, in this very short notice, so in fact, I was reading something about subalternity, subaltern literature for yesterday's chairperson program. So that has come very handy for me to prepare for this short notice program. And I think, sir, can I start? I have the participants joined, or are we going to wait for a few more participants?
No, sir. You can proceed, sir. There are more participants. The participants will join.
There are, it seems, only 13 participants, sir. Are they going to join, or can we just go ahead?
We can go ahead, sir. I will ask the participant to come in.
Okay, sir. No problem. Right. So the topic of this morning's lecture is the narrative of subalternity. The narrative of subalternity. And yesterday you had a very live session in the morning. And I think I'm going to take up the concept that has been touched by the speaker of yesterday's morning session, and I'm going to elaborate on what subalternity is, right? Subaltern studies, to be very precise. Right. Let us first discuss the concept called subaltern studies and how it started and where it started. I think I was talking about the theories influencing literature, how theories emerged during the second half of the 20th century, after the 1950s, owing to Saussure. Saussure is credited with the structuralism. And after Saussure, we had several theorists. And the second half of 20th century happens to be a period of theories, right? We had a lot of theories. So before going to the subaltern studies, let me give you some idea about how this subaltern study as a faculty or as an area of interest emerged, right? So let us go to the 20th century, the later half of the 20th century. I think you might have heard of these great critics, I.A. Richards, F.R. Lewis, William Emerson. All these people were there, and they were the pioneers for the emergence of theories, because what they did was they read the text very closely. So they advocated close reading of the text, and they advocated trying to find meaning within the text, right? And they gave importance to the author. So there was a big connection between author and the text. The author happens to be the person who produces the text. So it is more or less mother-child relationship between a text and its author. So when there is an author, when we go to a text, we find out or try to find out what the text means, what the text tries to convey. And another step, which is so important, is what the author conveys through the text. So this was the crux of study, dominating criticism up to the emergence of theories, right? So when we read text, we went to text, we went to find out what the text meant, we went to find out what the author intended. So this kind of study, this kind of approach to criticism, this kind of approach to text, to literature, is called liberal humanism. Is called liberal humanism, right? So what is this liberal humanism? You know what liberal humanism is. We go to a text, we look for meaning, we try to find out what the writer says, what Shakespeare talks about in the play Hamlet, what Shakespeare tells about Lady Macbeth. So there is a connection between Shakespeare and the Macbeth play. So this was liberal humanism. So this phrase, liberal humanism, was in fact not practiced or was not in vogue. This phrase was not in vogue to refer to the earlier critical means, but it emerged after the emergence of theories. So after Saussure came, Saussure actually revolutionized our means of seeing works of art. Okay, so he said language is a mere convention. It is an agreement, right, between or amongst speakers, and the signs, the spoken sound or the written letter. There is no connection between the written letter or the spoken sound and the concept that these two mean, right? So when I say tree, the concept I mean is a big structure with plenty of branches, a lot of green leaves and big trunk. So this is the concept, and I try to convey the concept using the sign tree. Okay, so this thing, so the connection between signifier, signified, I think you might have heard of this, is not very intact, right? It is only loosely connected. So this is very important. This is the fundamental element. And post-structuralism, which came afterwards, after structuralism, that post-structuralism, the main proponent of post-structuralism is Jacques Derrida. What Jacques Derrida did was, he questioned this center. Why did he question center? One of the important findings of Saussure is meaning is only relational. That is, the meaning is not within the word. The concept that the sign or the signifier represents is not within the signifier. So meaning is something not within the text, right? See, meaning is not within the text. Meaning is what we attribute to text. Attribute, that is, I bring meaning from my own experience, my own knowledge, my own understanding, my own capabilities of knowing things. So that is why when we read a work of art, when we read a poem, when we read daffodils, when we read The Solitary Reaper, when we are very young, we don't actually understand much. When we are middle-aged, we see more. When we are old, when we read The Solitary Reaper again, something that is dramatic is in the poem. How is it? When we were young, we were not able to get these meanings. But when we grow old, we get all these meanings, right? So that is why the meaning is not within the text, right? So that's very important. The meaning is not within the text. So the meaning or the concept signified is only relational. That is, suppose I want to understand what a hut is, H-U-T, hut. Then I can only understand hut only when I know what a bungalow is, what a palace is, what a house is, right? So it's relational, right? So this element is taken up by Derrida, and when the meaning is relational, where this center exists, there is no center. So that is very important. That happens to be the revolutionizing concept that shook the departments of philosophy, because Jacques Derrida is a philosopher, French philosopher, philosophy, sociology, medicine, linguistics, literature, history, psychology, even economics, right? So it shook everything, right? So these theories are not literature theories. What I mean by it, the theories emerged not in the department of English, or not in the department of literature, for that matter, any literature, English, French, German, Canadian, or Hindi, Tamil, whatever be the literature. It did not emerge in a literary department. It emerged in various social sciences departments, right? So these theories are taken up by students of literature, readers of literature, and they use theories to understand literature, to interpret literature. So the earlier approach was going to the text, looking for the meaning, looking for what the author would have said or the author would have intended in a text. Okay, so that is wrong. That is not right according to the theorists. If I still go to a text, look for a meaning, look for what the author has suggested, then I actually follow the method called liberal humanism. As students of literature in college, while we learn literature, we still employ this method. We go to a text, we want to know what the meaning of the text is. In fact, we do not even read a text. We go to notes. We rely on the third person who gives a summary of something. You have a lot of websites, and you go to the website, type the summary of so-and-so stuff or X, Y, you get the summary and what the writer says. So we read about the writer's time, we read about writer's living style, we learn about Charles Dickens's early sufferings, and then we apply that to understanding of the text. Okay, this is older, right? Okay, now let's come back to this. Okay, then. What is the connection between this and the subaltern studies, right? What is the connection between this and subaltern studies, right? During the 1990s, this particular practice that began in the Department of History in England, right? the Department of History in England started a practice. That was in the year 1982. That was the year 1982. It started a practice. What was the practice? The practice was to go to Indian colonial history and try to find out that the history really speaks about the sufferings of the Indians, or how the colonial history discusses the sufferings or the rule of the British, the way the people of the Indian subcontinent were treated. So this was the study that began in the year 1982, right? I think we go to the PowerPoint presentation. I just did a PowerPoint presentation this morning as I had no time. Before going to PowerPoint presentation, let me also discuss one or two points so that you will understand what the subaltern studies is. So the phrase subaltern studies actually began in 1982 because the University of Sussex, right? That's where the important person called Ranajit Guha, who is employed in that university. Ranajit Guha is 99 years old. 99 years old. He was born in 1923. He's a very famous historian of Indian origin who worked in University of Sussex, England, right? So he started this movement, the movement called Indian Colonial Historiography. Indian Colonial Historiography. Does history really talk about the real sufferings of people? Does it really talk about the real freedom movement? That's the functional basis that made these scholars reread history. So what they did was they reread history. What they did was they reread history. And this practice, which began in the 1980s, and they started a journal titled Subaltern Studies, and many articles were contributed to this particular journal by Ranajit Guha, who happens to be the pioneer. And there are also a few writers of considerable importance. Gyanendra Pandey, who was in Oxford University then. I'm talking about 1980s, 40 years ago. And David Hardiman and David Arnold, both were Englishmen who were working in University of Sussex, along with Ranajit Guha. These were contributors to the journal under the heading Subaltern Studies. So this history movement, what started in the Department of History, after the retirement of Ranajit Guha. Ranajit Guha got retired in 1988. Afterwards, many people started contributing to this journal, and the Subaltern Studies concept was kept alive. It was much discussed and it began spreading to various other departments, right? What started as a practice in the Department of History. The main objective of Subaltern Studies is to study history, especially colonial Indian history, and find out whether the colonial Indian history mostly contributed by, I'm going to use a term, the elites. E-L-I-T-E, elite. I think you are familiar with this word, elite, E-L-I-T-E. Elite. Elite are the sophisticated, the rich, the educated. In this concept, the word elite refers to both the British scholars and the native Indian scholars who had the chance of educating themselves in the method used by the Englishmen. Those who went to England studied there. Those who studied both in India, and had a chance to go to foreign countries and studied. Those rich people of India who had a chance to travel to England and study. And when they came back, they knew the language of the British, and they made use of the language to question their method of rule. They started questioning the oppressive nature of the colonial British officers, right? So the term elite used by Ranajit Guha, the term refers to both the British elite and the Indian elite. So this elite is not the subaltern group, right? So the elites were contributing to history documents. That is, they were writing about colonial Indian period, right? The British people started saying what we did to India. We unified India. We brought a lot of developments. We brought the railways. We connected the entire breadth and length of India. And the British were ruling using East India Company till I think 1857 or 1860s, I think, because Queen Victoria came to power, you know very well, I think in 1837. And after 20 years, we had this first war of independence, Seethai mutiny, according to them. And till then, India was under the control of the East India Company, right? And then when this happened, they transferred power to the Queen. So during the 1860s, the Queen became the direct head of the Indian subcontinent, right? Okay. So this is a background that we require to understand what subaltern studies is all about, right? I'm going to play the PowerPoint presentation in a minute or two. Okay, fine. So this thing that you should keep in mind, elite versus subaltern. So the word subaltern here does not only refer to marginalized, it refers to a big chunk of population that had no chance of expressing itself, right? So those who could not express come under the category of subalternity or subaltern. Okay, I think we are going to the PowerPoint presentation. Can you see the presentation now? Hello?
Sir, no, sir, we are not able to see this.
Oh, I think there seems to be some kind of issue. Just a second, sir. Can you see it now, sir?
No, sir, only your name is visible. We are not able to see this.
You couldn't see. There seems to be some problem. Just display our other apps. Okay, I go to the share, document, web URL, camera, whiteboard, document, box, Google Drive, Microsoft OneDrive. Zoom will stop capturing everything that is displayed on this. Stop now. Is it visible now, sir?
No, sir.
Oh, I think I don't know how to present this. There seems to be some issue.
Now visible,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Your screen is now visible, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Now your screen is visible, sir.
Can you see it now?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yeah. So this is the PowerPoint presentation. Let's go to the first slide. Yeah. So, subaltern studies, writings on Indian history and society. So I explained all these things, right? How it started as an approach to study, and it began in 1982 as an approach to Indian colonial history. Prominent member Ranajit Guha, who was born in 1923, is still alive. He was born in the then unified India. He was born in now a place which is now in Bangladesh. And he was teaching in University of Sussex, right? Okay. So before going to the next slide, let me talk about what colonialism is, right? So this history approach actually spread to other departments, and it went and it was taken up by the scholars who discussed literary works, right? So during the 90s, two important books that appeared, in fact, you can call it during the late 80s, the book that got published was Bill Ashcraft's Empire Writes Back and Edward Syed's book Culture and Imperialism. These two books revolutionized the concept of colonialism. And this historiographic approach to history by the scholars under Mr. Ranajit Guha had been taken up by scholars to study works of art written both by the oppressor and the oppressed, right? So the oppressor's work written by the British about the colonies, about the colonized, about their behavior, their style of living, that was those works were taken up for discussion, and also by the writers who belong to the local oppressed communities, that is the colonized. So this method, which is a very important method, which talks about how to view a work of art. This has to be connected with what Mr. Derrida says, because Derrida dismissed with the concept of center. So what center means here is the way the Europeans dress. It is called Eurocentrism. You will find these words in the later slides. Eurocentrism. When we dress like a European, we are considered to be the cultured. When we dress like a European, we are considered to be the cultured. So our aim, the most of the rich men of India during the time of the British, they were able to get English education. In fact, they were trying to emulate the British themselves. I think you are familiar with the word emulate. That is, they are trying to imitate, and they are trying to be even with the British, right? That's very important. So that is why Guha calls them the elite. They are not the real historians, even though they represent nationalism. So he started going deep into history texts written by both British writers and Indian writers. Especially a very important writer from India is Bipin Chandra. Bipin Chandra wrote History of Colonial India with the concept of nationalism. Right. Okay, let's move to the next slide. Let me explain the slides one by one, as we have not much time. We have just 15 minutes, I believe. So, University of Sussex include historians from India, the UK, and Australia. So they were all there in University of Sussex. And they included many teachers from India also. They were also in Indian universities and in Australian universities, and they formed a group. And that group reread history. Right. So the next thing is colonial Indian history through nationalism, Orientalism. Right. So what Guha says is he classifies the Indian colonial history into two types. One written by the British, that government documents. They talk about what the British did to India, how the East India Company promoted a lot of business, and how these Indians became rich, or they got benefited by the developments that the British brought. This is one point of view. The other one is the history written by the Indians, who talked about a concept called nationalism. Right. This is very important. So India is a very vast country. Now it is called India. In the past, there was no India. There were a lot of princely states. Travancore is a princely state. Pudukkottai is a princely state. So there were a lot of princely states. And each state had a ruler. And one state's ruler is equivalent to another state's ruler. So there was no national concept as there was such in the past. Right. Okay. Now let's go to the third point. Eurocentrism. I think the T is missing in that slide. Eurocentrism, actually. EUROCENTRISM. So it is Eurocentric. So when they see the world, I was talking about Conrad's Heart of Darkness yesterday. So when Conrad saw, or the narrator of Heart of Darkness saw the native Africans, he considered them as not cultured. What is culture here? Culture here means the way the Europeans live, the way the Europeans dress. So when the Africans wear dresses, or they do not wear dress at all, they considered these people as not cultured. That's how it is presented in Heart of Darkness by Conrad. Fine. So we go to the next item, geopolitics, economic geography. So that's very important. Geopolitics happens to be a very important word today, because the word geopolitics means the effect of economic geography on the powers of the state. So we are completely controlled by money, right? So what is economic geography? Economic geography is a branch of geography that discusses, or that is concerned with the territory which is very soothing to capital investment, also for making money. For example, agriculture, oil, all these things come under this economic geography. What does this term to do with subaltern studies? Because politics is highly influential. All these things influence politics. So politics in the end becomes the oppressor. So that is why an understanding of these things an understanding of these things is very important. So commodities, power of the state, right. So we go to the next item, first world, third world, right. This is a very important concept. First world countries. The grown countries like the US, France, Germany, all these countries are grown countries. They are called the first world countries. They are welfare states. So that's the term that they use to refer to themselves, because they are economically well off and they cater to the requirements of the people. But we belong to the third world country, where poverty is very much prevalent. Not much growth is seen as equivalent to the growth of the Western countries. Right. All these things. And colonial post-colonialism, I think I explained, and subject of the West. So this is very important. So what is this Eurocentric element? When the Westerners view something, they bring in their own cultural ideologies. So when you do not wear good dresses, you are not cultured, according to them. When you do not actually shake hands, when you do not have table manners, you are not at all cultured. So the prime element of the West is to project the West as the subject. That is, the subject West is the center. And all these other cultures should be treated in comparison with the Western culture, which happens to be the the touchstone. I think you are familiar with this touchstone by Matthew Arnold. So when you go to buy gold, the gold is put to test whether it's real gold or not. So the real gold is analyzed or found out by just scrapping it with something, and that is how the West concept, the concept of West, is the ideal concept of culture, and the other cultures that are compared with this West, and when these cultures do not match with this Western culture, then those cultures are not considered as culture at all. So this is the Western view. West as subject of the West. Right, we move to the next one. Can the subaltern speak? Right. So the colonial subject happens to be the other. Okay. So when this man in Conrad's novella goes to visit the African country, I think he goes to, Congo, I believe. I read it long back. Please excuse my memory. Congo, and there he finds these people and their living conditions. So the Westerners have this concept called the other. So for them, those who do not behave like Westerners are the other. So the other is something that you do not approve of, something that you do not acknowledge, right? So the things that you do not acknowledge, all those things are branded as the other. Suppose I behave properly and I don't consider improper behavior as a cultured behavior, then I call the other as an element of improper behavior. So whatever I dislike becomes the quality of the other. That's how Edward Said describes the concept of other, Oriental concept of other of the West. Right. So post-colonialism questioned the universalist claims made on behalf of literature by liberal humanists. Right. That's what the liberal humanists did. I think you are familiar with the liberal humanists. I explained already. They universalized certain things. So when you go to a work of art, everything is universalized. We have to see the suffering of the person, and we have to universalize the suffering. That the rich people suffer. The rich people suffer, and the suffering of the rich is considered suffering. The suffering of the poor or the downtrodden or the oppressed is not considered suffering. So there is universalization. When you see it, I used the term Seethai mutiny. That's the reference that the British give to this uprising that happened in 1857, but we call it First War of Independence. So that's the difference between us. So when they say Seethai mutiny, we should not agree with that terminology. We say this is First War of Independence. So that is why there is no universalization of concepts, of works of art. Right. So timeless universal significance of literature, that is questioned. Nothing is timeless, universal. Post-colonialism questions it. Because timeless universal significance disregard cultural, social, regional, national differences, right? So what is suffering to a rich man may not be a suffering to a poor man. A rich man is very upset because he cannot make much money. But a poor man suffers because he cannot have food. So you say suffering is only when you do not make much money, and you universalize this concept of suffering. Then we disagree. No, for you it is suffering. For us it is not suffering. So that is why there is no universalization. Disregarding cultural, social, regional, national differences in experience and outlook. Right. Then we move to the next slide. So what is this subject? Exploiters a side of the international division of labor. That's what Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak says, right? She says, when you devise what labor is, your Western ideology operates in it. The West tries to give you a definition to what labor is. That is your definition. And you say, this is labor, this is not labor. You say, this is suffering, this is not suffering. So you put to question all that is considered to be the established, the centric concepts, right? So we go to the next one, other. So this is the definition of the other. West Orientalism considering the Easterners. Who is the other? According to the Westerner, we are all others. So we have no culture. We have no, they don't give any individual credit to the Easterners, the oppressed, the colonized. The colonized are considered to be a bunch of masses, right? They are not individualistic. Whereas when you take up Westerners, they consider them as an individual. Individual has a credit. Individual has traits. Individual has capacities. Whereas the East or the other has no individuality. See, the other is clubbed with so many people. The other is only a mass behavior, right? Mass psychology. So the other has no individualistic trait. The aspects that Westerners never acknowledge. So they consider these elements, for example, cruelty, sensuality, decadence. They give all these credits to the other. See, the other happens to have all these things. They are cruel, they're sensual, they're low, they're base. And they also create an image, a picture. They also create a kind of visual portrayal that the East is exotic, mystical, seductive. I think if you watch the movies, I think there is one James Bond movie, Octopussy, which was shot in Rajasthan. If you watch that movie, you find a lot of rope climbers, dagger swallowers, and those people who do magic, they are portrayed. That's how the East is portrayed. There is a very interesting book by Paul Brenton, A Search in Secret India. He goes in search of those mystics in India. It's a very interesting book. Paul Brenton's A Search in Secret India, and he also wrote much about the goddess. The god in Tiruvannamalai. A Message from Arunachala is another book by him, I think. Right. So the East is an exotic, mystical, seductive, magical place considered as masses, no individual trait. So they are masses. They behave like this. Okay, we move to the next slide. Okay. So we go to Ranajit Ruga, historiography. The oppressed, their knowledge disqualified as inadequate to task. Okay. So what the Westerners say, they say the oppressed have knowledge. They admit that they have knowledge. These are the words of Foucault. All these things, all the 3+2 lines are statements made by Michel Foucault. They have knowledge. The natives have knowledge, but they have knowledge which is inadequate, which never qualifies itself to be equivalent to the knowledge of the Westerner. உங்களுக்கு அறிவு இருக்கு, ஆனா அந்த அறிவு எங்க அறிவுக்கு அளவுக்கு இல்லை. So எங்களுடைய அறிவு தான் சிறந்த அறிவு. See, our knowledge, our wisdom is superior. Your knowledge is not superior. So you have to elevate yourself to the level of us. So our knowledge, our wisdom is the center. You have to approach the center. So when this center is questioned, there is no distinction called center periphery. Everything becomes equal. Your knowledge is superior to you. Our knowledge is superior to us. Right? Naive knowledge located low down on the hierarchy. Your knowledge is of no use. It has no scientificity. It's a very important word, scientificity. So you have these myths. You have this emotional knowledge. You have a lot of beliefs. You have a lot of belief in certain things, and that belief is your knowledge, your pseudo science. They call it pseudo science, or whatever it is, right? Okay. If given the chance, can speak and know their conditions. Okay, these subalterns. Who is a subaltern here? The subaltern happens to be a very big mass of people, right? If they are given a chance, they can speak and know their conditions, but still their condition, their knowing of their condition is not up to the level of the Westerners' knowledge. So that's how they see us. Fine. Then this thing disturbs the phased development of the oppressed. So imperialist project, the way the imperialists see us, they try to use us for their own improvement, for their own functionality. Right. Let's go to the next slide. So Indian colonial history through the discontinuous chain of peasant insurgencies. Okay, this is a very important concept. I think by explaining this concept, I can switch over to the final part of my lecture. Okay, what this Guha's team does is, he calls, I think I have already explained this, Guha's team considers both the British and the nationalist of Indians as elites, right? So how they view that? So this is elite presentation of history, even if it is presented by the local people who got educated and who tried to emulate the British style of living, who tried to bring in a concept of nationalism. So according to Guha, there were a lot of peasant movements, insurgencies happening throughout the princely states of the Indian subcontinent. And they never had the phenomenon of nationalism. There was no such thing called nationalism. They were fighting against their own masters. So there was this master-slave dialect. I think you might have heard of this, master-slave dialect. So there were problems in villages where a community, which happens to be a dominant community in a village, tries to oppress the low-caste community. Or the same community, in some villages, the number of oppressed community is very less. And in some other villages, the oppressed community's number is more. So in that village, the oppressor becomes the oppressed. I think you get the idea. In one village, one particular community is dominant. In a different village, the same community is negligible. So the same community becomes the oppressed in a different territory. That's what Guha says. So there was no universalization of things. So it is not like that. So there were this slave master problem cutting across communities, right? Cutting across castes, right? So dominated by elitism, colonialist bourgeois credited to British rule, policy, culture. I think I explained all these things. Their education, their method of functioning, all these things educated. What the Britishers or the East India Company wrote through their documents was this: we gave them some methods of doing business, and we made them we made them see profit. We made them come up in life. We educated them, and that was the reason why they came up in life, and they wanted to enjoy certain privileges amongst themselves, like the British people. See, the natives wanted to imitate the British. That is why they became leaders. So it was only personal interest. There was no nationalism. That's what the British people say. And Guha actually does not approve of both. We move to the next slide. So colonial subaltern. So who is this subaltern? So dominant foreign group. You know who the foreign group is, the colonized, the colonizer. Here you have the British, we have the Dutch, we have the Portuguese, we have the French. All these people were colonizing us. And the dominant indigenous group, which is a group which went to educational institutions and studied. And I think there is a very popular statement in Shakespeare's Tempest. You taught me language, now I know how to curse. A statement made by Caliban. So these people learned the language and started questioning. That is the elite, all India level indigenous group. And there is another dominant indigenous group, that is the Indian group, which is regionally dominant. For example, a particular caste is dominant in a particular territory. The particular caste is not dominant in another territory. So there is no nationalism. And the fourth one is so important. So according to Guha, who are the subalterns? So the subalterns are the demographic difference between the total Indian population and all those elites described. So the three group versus the other group. So the subaltern is not the dominant foreign group, is not the foreign dominant indigenous group all India level, is not the dominant indigenous group regional level. So that's the subaltern according to Guha. Then master-slave dialectic, I think you know very well, in the zamindari system, and how certain communities enjoyed a lot of wealth, a lot of land, and how they made the laborers work as slaves in their land, and how these things actually when peasant insurgencies began, the fundamental reason for the peasant insurgency happens to be master-slave dialect. That is, there was a problem. There was a different oppressor. The British, the foreigner was not the oppressor here. Here the caste head happens to be the oppressor, who oppresses the others. Then consciousness of the subaltern. So I think I spoke about what subaltern is, and what the text does not say becomes important. So this we get from Derrida. So what Derrida does is deconstruction. What is deconstruction? What Derrida says is very simple. You believe you have a real command over the language. You believe you have a real command over the language. You say you mean only this, but your writing not only means what you say, it means something opposite to what you say. So Derrida's deconstruction is all about finding means of getting at the things that run counter to the meaning that the man or the writer or the woman or the author means. That is, to simplify what I have said, there is one meaning according to the author. But what Derrida says is, you say this is what you mean, but the words that you have made use of also give a counter meaning. That is meaning opposite to what you say. So Guha tries to go to that. So what he finds out is, he takes up the text written by the British, he takes up the text written by the national elites, and he goes deep into those texts, and he looks for the things that are not said. So when they talked about how these Jamindari system promoted nationalism, then he went deep into the text to find out. So there was an oppression here in this context, an indigenous oppression taking place. Fine. So history from below. So it is different from the method followed by the Marxian ideologists. That is Marxist theories. They say, okay, Guha's approach is not different. Okay, they say this subaltern approach is not different. That's what the Westerners say. So this is something that you already come across in Marxism. Marxism has this approach. What Guha has done is he has just imbibed the qualities of Marxism and he tries to analyze the text. No, that is not the approach of Guha. Guha actually goes deep. What Marxian ideology says is history from below. History from below means you go to those oppressed people or the laborers, and Gramsci is credited with this. Antonio Gramsci, I think yesterday's lecture discussed much of Gramsci. Gramsci talks about this, going to the last stratum, the last rung of society. But Guha's approach is entirely different. He goes deep. He dismisses nationalism. He dismisses the way the British present the colonial history. And he goes deep and find out how the subaltern elements work really well to oppose this oppressor. That's the point. And the history to literature, this is the transformation. So 1996 afterwards, Empire writes back. I told you about colonial perspective. So there are three means according to Peter Berry in his book Beginning Theory. He talks about three post-colonial concepts called adopt, adapt, adapt. That is, the first method is we simply inheriting the method followed by the English writers, the writers of England or the Ireland nations. And we simply follow that method and we try to write in the way they write. That is the first means. That is adopt method. And the second means we retain the structure and we bring in our own stories. So first we retain their own structure and we try to imitate their own study of, their own method of writing novel. For example, let us say novel. That is adopt phase. In the second phase, adapt phase, what we do is ADOPT is first, ADAPT is second. In the second phase, what we do is we keep the structure of novel, the European structure, and in it we bring our own story. That is second phase. And adapt, ADEPT. The third phase, final phase is we discard both the Western structure and also trying to fit our own ideas in Western structure. We invent our own structure to suit our own stories. That is the adapt phase. So that is how it transforms from history to literature. And minorities, I'm going to use this word minorities. Who are the minorities here? So the word minority, the subaltern. You can substitute minority with subaltern. We find women are always subaltern concepts, because in a patriarchal society, women are not given equality. That is number one. Gender parity. There is no gender parity. But this historical approach, historiology of Guha, tries to address that question. That tries to address that issue of gender inequality. Then we have racial oppression, we have cultural oppression, we have linguistic oppression, we have this class oppression in foreign countries, we have this caste oppression in countries like India, we have religious, social minorities, we have economical minorities. Right? We have economical minorities. And we are even, we can say, we are also educated minorities to some extent. Because when the oppressor is so powerful, nothing could make them rise against the oppressor. And there is a very interesting book that I have included here, Homeless in My Land. This is a very interesting book published in 1992, a collection of Dalit Marathi short stories, brilliant short stories written by Dalit writers. In fact, Marathi literature has a very beautiful Dalit contribution, which is so beautiful, so wonderfully presented. And it does not mean that other contributions in India are not up to that. I don't say it like that. What I say is, it is such a well presented work. And similarly, you find a lot of other literary concepts emerging in India. So the title of the book is Homeless in My Land, which is a collection of translated Marathi short stories. In it, they celebrate the Dalit culture. See, there is one such one interesting short story. I was searching for the book this morning. I have the copy, but I couldn't find it. I'm sorry. There is one such story. I don't remember the title. In it, there is a celebration for getting cow meat. There is such a short story. Because I think it goes like this. In a village, everybody gathers. They try to collect as much meat as possible. And there is a story which because when we say this is your culture is bad, no, there is no such thing. Every culture is equivalent. Every culture is important. There is no superior culture, inferior culture. So there is only an equal platform. The platform has equated everyone. So things like that. And there is this last one, Jai Bhim Comrade, which is a very brilliant documentary made by Anand Patwardhan, which discusses the Dalits of Maharashtra, and also the ghazal, that the form that they have developed and they have popularized. There are beautiful ghazal poems and fantastic singing of ghazal poems, how they put their suffering in those songs. And Bhim here refers to Ambedkar, and how Ambedkar embraced Buddhism, and how people flock to his grave on December 6th every year, which is in Bombay, which is modeled after a Buddhist place of burial. And this particular documentary goes deep into the practices. So that's how we try to interpret things. And this is all about subaltern concept. And I say thank you for having listened to me. And I think I am going to stop the presentation and we move over to the passage. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I think we are ready for questions. Let me come out of this. Okay.
Thank you, sir. So the presentation was really excellent.
Oh, I think
a clear walkthrough to the theory of subaltern theory.
Thank you, sir. And
so we will go for a question. Is there any questions? Can be, dear participants? Dear participants, any questions? Thank you, sir. So, really a great walkthrough to the theory, subaltern theory.
Yes,
First
sir.
of all, I should thank you for accepting the immediate call for the stage. It was an unaccepted, we did not accept this in the morning.
Yes, sir.
We had a call to the chief person, but she said she was in a meeting, an emergency meeting to the higher education department at TNPSC, and we had no other choice but to turn to you. And we first of all, we should.
In fact, I forgot to mention one particular thing. If you allow me, I can also say that. There was a magazine article that appeared in the Hindu last month on Sunday, June 20th, 2021 edition, which talks about a very interesting personality of West Bengal. A Sudra woman, that's how it is titled, a Sudra queen and the sacred river, and how this Sudra woman, who excelled in the business acumen, she belonged to the fishermen community, and how she fought against the East India Company by just doing some wonderful business, and how she also built this Dakshineshwar Kali temple, where we have this seer, Mr. Paramahamsa, Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who actually became a priest of this temple. And this interesting magazine article talks about this subaltern issue and how this woman fought single-handedly against the oppressed. Against the oppressors. Thanks a lot, sir. That's the thing I thought of mentioning, but I forgot. Sorry.
Thank you for your beautiful presentation, and we are really happy for inviting you for this
somebody
lecture.
Has put a question, seems, sir.
Yes, sir. Someone has the chat box.
It seems.
It is. It is.
Yes, in this age of digital divide, do you think subalternity plays out in the dimension of technology? Yeah, it's true. It has various dimensions. See, we have been talking very high of this online classes, technology revolutionizing our learning, and many studies have been conducted off late. I think there was a report in the Hindu, either it was yesterday or day before yesterday, a shocking revelation that this technology can only be used as an aid, not a predominant thing to teach things. Physical classroom can have technological aid. That is okay. But depending absolutely on technology is something that has got, even in the US, even where technology is very supreme and ruling the country, there too the learning is not up to the mark. But come to India, we have a big digital divide. Government schools, no internet connection, even no computers in most of the government schools, and the divide between the affluent and the poor. So here the poor is not caste-based poor. Poor is everyone is poor. Whether the poor belongs to a very upper caste or a lower caste or of a lower community, it doesn't make any difference. The poor is poor. The poor is deprived of so much. So here he becomes a subaltern. He or she becomes a subaltern. I think technology has divided us in a different way, because those who can afford can have this technology. Those who can spend much those who can live in a place. There are places in mountain ranges. For example, in Kashmir, you don't have you have all facilities. You have a computer, you have a mobile phone, but still the terrain does not help you to get access to your lessons. So I think there is a lot of division on the basis of technology also. I think I have answered your question.
Any other questions? Now I call upon the organizer of the seminar, Mr. Balamurugesh, to give word of thanks to our chief guest of the morning. Balamurugesh, sir. Balamurugesh, sir. Balamurugesh, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, please unmute. Balamurugesh, sir. Please unmute. Sir. Bala, sir.
Yes.
Please unmute, sir.
Can you hear?
Yes. You can give a vote of thanks.
Sir, actually, there is some problem in the laptop, so that I proceeded through my mobile, sir. Most respected Secretary, Armumli Ammal College, Mr. N.R. Rajan, sir, revered Principal, Captain Dr. Jack Master, Head of the English Department, Dr. V. Rajan, sir, who is the linchpin of the program. Distinguished resource person, Dr. V. Balakumar, Assistant Professor of English, PKR Arts College for Women, and the office bearers and my dear colleagues and participants. Now we can add our resource person of this session as the alumni of our college. So our indebtedness to the institution is proved by our resource person. Thank you so much, sir, for accepting our invitation in short notice for enlightening us with your knowledge. It is my pleasure and privilege to propose vote of thanks to this mind-blowing session and subalternity studies. We know what we are, but know not what we may be. Sir, after listening to your talk, the wheel is come full circle. Gravity is the soul of wit in your enlightening session. Once again, I thank all the dignitaries for providing me this opportunity. Thank you and thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your vote of thanks, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all, sir. Subbiya? Convener? Subbiya?
Guru, solu Guru.
Meeting end பண்ணிக்கலாமா?
End பண்ணிக்கலாம்.
Okay. Thank you for all.
Okay, sir. Thank you
Thank you for
very much.
all.
Thanks for the
Thank you,
opportunity.
sir. Thank you, sir.
Dear participants, we will meet in the afternoon section at 1:30, sir.
Okay, sir. Do we have paper presentation today?
No, we don't have. It is just a valedictory, sir.
Okay. Okay, sir.
Valedictory function.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you.
The valedictory function where I will be summing up the 2 days events, and you can just comment your views on the 2 days session, sir. You will be the chief guest for the afternoon session too.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sir, Subbiya will contact you, sir.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
The host is not unmute my audio, sir.